Hey guys, how's it going? Today I'm going to be reviewing Hybris Disordered Cosmos. This is on Kickstarter. It's actually ending right around the time I'm posting this. There's just a few hours left. There's going to be a link in the description below if you're interested. But for now, let's go ahead and discuss the game and see how good it is. As always, I'd like to start off by thanking my patrons and YouTube members. Without their support, this channel would not be what it is today. Both the quality and quantity of the videos you see are in large part thanks to them, so thank you for that. Additionally, thanks to all of you out there that are either liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing, pausing that ad blocker, clicking the merch link, Amazon link, all that stuff down below. All that's hugely helpful, and I'm greatly appreciative of it. Alright, let's go ahead and dive into all the pros and cons. Okay, now I went over the Kickstarter page again, and I felt like it actually described pretty much the high points of this game, and I don't care to really talk about nuance unless I'm going to be discussing it in a pro and a con, so I'm not going to be covering how the game is played, if nothing else. There are already videos out there that explain it in much more detail than I would here anyway. So I'm going to go off the assumption that anything that I just talk about, I'll kind of explain, but other than that, we're just going to kind of move on. So the first thing I want to note, and it's just a note, is this rulebook. Now, this rulebook is already older than the version that's posted on the Kickstarter, so I actually went and looked at that and saw some of the updates. There's still some issues. This one wasn't even all in English, but the one that they posted actually ended up being fairly good. There's still a lot of improper English usage, and there's some omissions to the rules too. Like, for instance, this is the spark track that you can see right here at the bottom, and as you gain these sparks from different things, you can actually take them off of your tiles or your enhancements or abilities and put them down here. You have to go left to right, but the rules don't state that even now. As far as I could tell, even on the new one, it doesn't actually mention that, and so you could just put it anywhere. Even the video I watched had to correct that after the fact. So the rules are still being worked on, but for the most part, nothing came out that had me worried about it, especially considering it isn't natively in English. So rulebook seems fine to me, but because it's not final, I'm not going to put a pro and a con on it, just kind of telling you where it is at its current state. Alright, now another thing to note, and this isn't necessarily a negative, just kind of a note on my part, while learning this, you have right here a track. This is your goodness track. And then here is a greatness track. So there's a greatness track and a goodness track. And the difference between great and good are actually totally different things. They do totally different things in the game. And that was kind of confusing. First of all, I struggled to remember which one was which. I eventually decided that the great one was larger, like size-wise. But at least in English, great, you know, you can be good and then you can be great, but it's kind of the same positive thing. It's just one's more than another. But to have them unrelated, but then called that was kind of odd. So just something I noticed. Now, another thing I noticed was just how great this game looks. It just looks really good. The components, the overall design of it, the art style, the colors, all of it is really, really fantastic. Now, granted, when it came to the purple board and the blue board, as a mildly colorblind person, I maybe didn't get as much as maybe some other people, though the tokens, at least in the prototype, were good. But, I mean, just all of the art is fantastic. I mean, all of this is just great. Here's a great example, I suppose, of just some of the amazing art and color usage and light usage and kind of display of components. And just a table spread. I mean, this just looks great. Even with all the standees, imagine putting some miniatures on the board there, painted up or not. I think this is one of the best looking games I own, and it's a prototype. It looks really, really good. Additionally, I think it has a very cool theme. So the theme of the whole game is essentially that the Greek gods have just put away the primordials, so Kronos and all of them and Gaia are being held prisoner in the underworld, and you can even like suck out the energy from them and use that to essentially be a god. So you're not quite fully godhood yet, and so the whole concept is you're kind of getting that hierarchy that they end up having. So it's kind of like the early beginnings, origins of the Greek gods. And I think it's a very cool synopsis, and it involves you making sure that you have believers that follow you and shrines built for you, but that you're also fighting with each other, and that you're dealing with all the Greek heroes in the Colosseum and whatnot. And I think it just it really fit. The theme is everywhere, from the determination track to the energy to just the different tasks and things that you're doing. And I just thought it went really, really well. So it definitely is a cool theme, and it fits throughout all of it. You're bestowing different technologies onto the Greek citizens and improving their lives, and then getting rewarded for it, and just all sorts of just neat things I really, really liked. I liked how this is like the mortal world, and then you have like the underworld and Olympus and, all these other, Hephaestus's workshop and all that kind of stuff is just something I really enjoyed. That being said, this is a table hog. What you're seeing right now is about half of a 7-foot table, and it actually continues to spill out over there. And we are so crammed that there's boards over here. This one's hanging off the table a little bit. It's just too big, and it doesn't need to be that big. Like, you'll see all the spacing here. None of this is just art. It's not necessary at all. There's no purpose. And that's like a big rim around the whole thing. That's not needed. You get the player boards, and a lot of them, like this one here, has like this diamonds coming off of it. The blue board there, those diamonds don't need to be there. It's all kind of oblong shaped when it's not super necessary. So it could be shrunk, and honestly, it should be shrunk. It should be trimmed down some. This is too big. I have been able to fit, I've reviewed plenty of games here, played plenty of games here. I've been able to fit every single one of my games just fine here. I really struggled to fit this in and actually have us anywhere near the board with our player boards. It's just too big. It needs to be trimmed down. Kind of no ifs, ands, or buts. It's pretty ridiculous. Now, additionally, another thing I noticed is just how finicky these standees are. Now, I know that the gods are going to be miniatures, and I would kind of hope that these would be as well. And it's not just because I like miniatures, but they're finicky to work with, especially when they're actually on the board. So when you get you get one that has multiple like next to each other, and they end up just blocking too much space. Because inherently with a standee versus a miniature, you see the art here, that would be and I get it's a little farther away, I apologize for that. Either way, the art inside of the standee portion would be the miniature, and then this like odd like white space outside of it to give it a shape that's kind of uniform is all extra taken up by the standee. And so it got to the point where some of the people had multiple like lined up, and you couldn't really see the tile here on the other side because it's blocked by these standees. And of course, they knock over pretty easy because they're a little tall and the base is a little small. At least in this prototype, the base could be improved. There could be improvements in the final version, of course, but as it stands, the standees just have a little bit too much white space again, they're all just kind of like that, where it's an image and then a whole bunch of space outside of it that makes it larger than I think it needs to be. It blocks a little bit of line of sight, knocks over easy. Not the funnest. I would much prefer miniatures. And again, the art style's awesome, and the miniatures look very well sculpted. So I'd be all down for more miniatures. Okay, so next up, let's talk about combat. So, even though this is very much a Euro-style game where you're essentially just placing workers, there's actually a lot of player interaction and even combat, both PvP and PvE combat. So the PvE combat would be something like, fighting heroes in the Colosseum to win them over. PvP would be fighting over a certain area, perhaps. So, whereas a lot of Euro games, you can just be purely blocked, in this one you can actually fight for it if you choose to. For the most part, and both pros and cons to that. And the combat's actually pretty good. So all you're doing is you have all these cards, and you're just kind of making little combos and strings of them. It's sort of like a Tainted Grail Askew kind of thing, where different cards can lead to another card or affect other cards down in the chain. If you're doing PvE, it's actually very quick because they have you know exactly how strong they are to begin with, and then you're just seeing if you can beat that or not. So that's actually very quick, which is good because it's only one person involved in it at all times, and it doesn't bog down the game at all. When it's PvP, it can go a little bit longer. It just depends. You actually get these very cool tokens to continue or stop, and it's in hidden, and so you can really kind of make it to where somebody uses an extra token when they didn't need to, or you can kind of take your card back, and I think it works out pretty well. And it can actually be kind of swingy. So I had one where one person was attacking, and I was attacking back, and it looked like we were tied, like literally we were one off. I was one ahead of them. And I had a card that I was able to flip over, and it had me actually remove one of their cards from their hand. And it happened to be the only card they could have played. The others would have been too expensive. And so then they were stuck with one less and with nothing to do. So without that special ability on the card, they were actually going to win. They could have played that other one and won. So, it can really have they had a high confidence in it. But then when I played that, then suddenly all of their hopes were gone. And I got the win. As the defender, they attacked me. It was on them. But, which actually was disastrous for them, because when you lose it was actually God versus God. So they were, like shamed, and all sorts of other game effects happened from that. It was actually kind of interesting, but, it was just involved and enjoyable. I liked it. It was nuanced, simple, and, pretty much what I would want out of, some light card play in a combat system. That being said, combat can be really swingy. So, for instance, we fought a few times some of these people in the Colosseum, and you can get a card that'll just add 1 to their strength, or you can add a card that adds 7 to their strength, and it's just random. So it might just be that, especially on some of these quests here, where you get procs based off the element on the card. You could flip a card and it literally just adds 1 to their strength. So their strength like 4, or even maybe just 1. Or you could flip a card and that card adds 7. And I haven't looked at all the cards yet, but that's pretty swingy. That could be kind of random. And they can control it somewhat, because, they can have a way you flip more cards, and now suddenly it's even more elements, proc more bonuses and stuff like that. So they can make strong enemies stay fairly strong by giving kind of a minimum for the most part. But you can have some weak enemies that suddenly become pretty strong, or vice versa if you just drew minimum all the time. So, I didn't really like the swinginess of it, but everything else about it I think was good. Alright, so the last thing I wanted to say about combat for now is that I felt that the ramp up is actually pretty good, and the possibilities are good as well. So, as you kind of go up and you increase your abilities inherently through either enhancement abilities, where you actually flip over the tile, or if you go down on the actual spark track and just kind of ignite that spark and you become more determined and stuff like that, you're just generally able to do more, you gain more people, so suddenly you just have more people, more resources, more possibilities, and more strength to do things with. So you can get more cards more easily, even if you lose some, so you feel more okay with fighting some, or even if a warrior goes down, you have others, and it just, it has a very good progression from that first turn where you only have 3 people to suddenly having kind of you almost feel like a little mini army of people doing your bidding, and kind of you got to pay for them. But anyway, it just I think it ended up being a good kind of natural flow. There is a possibility of kind of focusing on one and getting ahead of others. So, for instance, you could just try to unlock people quicker, or you could just try to unlock your abilities quicker, which is what most people are trying to do anyway. So that one's okay, but you can get a little ahead, especially with the determination and just being able to play more cards. And that's really the biggest thing. And that's because some people just specialize in combat sooner than others, and so some might be limited. Having a determination of 2 where you can have 2 values of cards is very, very limiting. And so if you're going up against somebody who can do 3 or God forbid 4, that's kind of rough. But otherwise, no, I think it ramped very well and just smoothly from early game to end game quite well. Okay, now for a little bit, I'd like to talk about just some of the different other aspects of the game that I liked, some of the mechanics or the systems at play here. For instance, I thought these quests went very, very well. So you have sagas, and then you have more traditional battles, and they're just kind of cool. The sagas are kind of like quests where you have to do something, and then you have to kind of discard a card and then do another, but you can actually put your, like, your face, your little symbol here, and say, oh, I did that part, but I didn't do the other two, and then somebody else could do the other two, and then whoever finishes it gets all the credit for it. But it's just kind of this kind of natural thing to do. It's mildly tied to the art and the title, which I think is kind of cool. A lot of it's kind of like, hey, you have the guidance, the card called guidance. Okay, well, that kind of works if you're talking about going on a journey, so sure. Stuff like that's kind of neat. Or there could be multi-tiered boss fights, sort of, in a sense. I think it worked out very well, and I really liked how the quest system worked, both, all of them there, but even how in the placement here you can either go in there and get 2 cards, but that's a contested spot, so you could be fought for that. But it makes you have a lot more options when it comes to doing the battles that you're about to do. Or you take the victory point, which is safe and nobody's going to fight you for it because anybody can have it. But then you didn't get those 2 cards. So all of the decision processes around the quest system I thought were very well done. Speaking of that, this location system in general, the fact that I could go here, but then somebody could fight me for it, but here anybody can get it. But then if I want to do something else, I have to pick other things, and it just works out really, really well how the locations work. Even in the mortal realm, where you can go from here to here, you go to Sparta and get a whole bunch of believers, but you won't get any prayers or goodness out of it. To another place like Argos here, where you can actually go and actually do something else, like from Olympus, but from over here. Choosing where your people go from all of the myriad of options, there's some deep thought that can go into this, and you could think about the nuances of when to go where with who a ton, especially when places start getting filled up. So maybe you want to take that, but maybe you really wanted to actually put a prayer in there, or better yet, you really wanted to get up on that greatness track, because that matters so much based off getting victory points and just in general getting to pick first in things. So maybe you want to fight Zeus for that, even though there's an empty spot there. There's tons of decision processes that go into just deciding where your person goes, nonetheless, what to do with what you got when you put it there. Now, speaking of what you get, the resource system here is probably my favorite resource system in any game. That includes some games with some pretty drastic crafting involved in it, to the point where they kind of tout it. I really, really liked the resource system here. So you have, the kind of the energy draining cubes, and these you kind of have to pay for your warriors or prophets to go out. Your god will go out for free, of course. But you also need that plus believers, and believers you really only get from the mortal realm, but you can get some, and by some I mean 1, from the oracle. But anyway, you get that from going to the mortal realm and then choosing to get these believers from different spots, and some will give you more than others. You need both of those to go get technologies, and actually, produce them faster, so they'll require some combination of the two. But then you put those back into here, and they'll give you stuff like prayers that you can take out of the prayer pool. Well, how do you get prayers in the prayer pool? Well, it's also going through here, where you land on, you put prayer in there. But if you put too many in there, then you're actually going to lose believers, or you're going to lose a shrine, which hurts you then too. So you're going to have to watch the pool system in here. And in fact, seeding this to where people don't want to go is fantastic. If you know somebody needs believers, and you have this at 8, and once they put it to 9, they actually have to get rid of one of their believers, it's great. So you can manipulate the pool here, both in how heavy it is or how close it is to the number without you getting it. In fact, to the point where once that was going to happen, and they actually fought somebody for this because it was only going to put 1 instead of 2. Because the 0 and 1 were taken, so the only other option was for them to lose a believer, and they didn't want to do this, so they actually fought for that just based off that. So that's really good as well, but then you also can gain glory, and that affects so much. You can gain these spark cubes that you slot in to increase and grow as a as a fledgling god. I was really, really impressed with it all. I think it worked out quite well. Just the dynamics between the believers and the prayers, and then the kind of energy cubes, to the point where in Olympus you can actually do a conversion chart, which is fantastic, especially because it's a great way, one of the best ways to get a person unlocked to have more people on your team. Okay, so I talked about the resources. I talked about the prayer specifically and how great that is. I wanted to talk about the primordials. So they're actually way over here, but I have a few here that I can show you as well, or at least talk about it. So as you go from alpha, beta, and gamma, you'll kind of be attacked by these primordials, so they'll have an effect on you. And they can vary a lot. You can kind of look at them and see they're almost all negative, but not quite. For instance, Pontus here, you can actually fight him. And if you win, you get a bonus. So there's actually some positive stuff you can get from it as well. If you want to play it safe, you can always go to the Oracle, check it out, see what's going on, and not be affected by it. You'll kind of be immune to the effects. Though sometimes it wouldn't have affected you anyway. And other times, again, it might be something actually kind of good if you're up for having a fight against the primordial. And in general, I really liked the variety that they had, the different things that they did, and the system around trying to look at what it is they do because it's kind of hidden. I think that just worked out really well. Okay, I'm going to end on just some general things. So one negative I had is there are times where your turn, even just putting one person down and doing one thing, which is all you're really ever doing, is taking one person, moving them in place, and doing one thing. Well, sort of one thing, and that's, I guess, where the issue comes in. It can get a bit fiddly. So, for instance, let's say you have a god, Hades here, and you put him in Limnos, okay? So you're going to go ahead and gain some goodness. So your goodness goes up, and let's say that maxed it all the way out. So you're at the top, or you're going to get a spark. And then you decide that you want to actually do the ability, which is for here to produce a technology. So then you get the technology, which then you can deploy. So now you can deploy technology here, and then of course you're flipping that over and getting that rewards, and you're doing that stuff. And then of course, because you did that, you now have to reset your goodness track, and now you get all that bonus stuff. So now you're updating your victory points, you're drawing a card, you're placing a spark somewhere, deciding where that goes. And then after that, then you have to do your card where you do something and then everybody else does something. And by the time that happens, it's been a while. I've also seen it kind of happen, with if there's fighting involved, where just sometimes there's a little bit of a chain reaction in the actions you're doing, to where between that and the upkeep, which is kind of rough, it just kind of bogs down a little bit to where suddenly you're like, okay, whose turn is it? like what's going on? It's been a while. People start to check out a little bit. So I would have liked that to be a little bit snappier, to ideally make that not possible. I don't really see how. I'm also not the game designer, of course, and of course you don't always have to design based off edge cases, but it is definitely something that can happen, and at least for me did happen, where turns just took a little too long every now and then, depending on the chain of events that were at play. Okay, now I'm actually going to mark this as a positive, but there's a negative involved as well, and part of that's just because of how personal it is. I would mark this game as fun, but not exciting. Now, I know when I say, oh, this game is not exciting, that sounds bad, but it's really the difference between eruo and Amerithrash, right? So for Amerithrash, you roll the dice and you jump, I got it, yeah, we're all cool, I just headbutt the goblin's head clean off. And with the eruo, you're like, I should put this profit right here. I'm going to do some mild calculus in my head and figure out that the optimal move would be to do that and then shift this token here. I guess it's the difference between a video game and a Sudoku puzzle, right? Or something like that. I always find worker placement style, kind of Euro style stuff to be more of a thinking game, which is fun. Which is why I said it's fun, but it's not exciting. You don't complete a Sudoku puzzle. You're like, yeah, I complete. I mean, maybe if it was really long and hard, I don't know. But for me, I don't really do that. But if I, did a backflip over a giant rat and then cleaved off her tail, I feel really, really cool about that. And that's because I was able to roll a bunch of dice, and those were exploding dice, and they critical, and then I did that, and it was the perfect thing. And you don't really get a lot of that here. It's just the nature of the genre, and where my tastes tend to lean, and you guys know this, my tastes tend to lean towards the Amerithrash. There was enough interaction between players, there was enough combat here to where and the theme is fantastic, to where it's still really enjoyable and cool, and still a lot of fun. It's not just an abstract, boring numbers game. You can have a lot of thematic entertainment out of this. Now, the last thing I want to say is I found this game to be incredibly nuanced but simple, and I think that's kind of two sides of the same coin. But inherently, all you're doing is you're putting a person on somewhere, and you're deciding between maybe 3 things on that location. But when you add all the resources, when you add the needed for abilities, when you add the other players that can interact with you, when you add who you pick, the fact that you have to actually pick where you're going before you go there. So you're planning a little bit of programmable stuff here, where you're deciding who goes where, and everybody is in secret. And then reacting to that, all the various options, the multiple points of resources and how they all interact with each other. It's a very, very strategic and nuanced game, but it's not hard to explain. After the first turn, like literally after the first part of the first turn, you're just like, oh, okay, I get this. Explaining you look like that red yarn meme guy where you're just like crazy, because it's like, oh, over here you can fight people, and then over here you're draining people, and here you're looking at the future but also getting kind of like these quest things, and then here you're converting stuff but also getting this technology, which then the technology you then have to build, and then you go through these processes, and there's a workshop, and then there's a factory after the workshop, and then if you're not yours, then you get that, and you put it sounds crazy, but it's all actually super simple. None of this is really complex or unintuitive in any sort of way, and I found that even my kids were able to play this without much help, actually, which is a lot to say. Even the combat, that's pretty impressive. Okay, so what rating do I give it? Is it a 10 out of 10? Is it a 98 out of 100? Is it a 972 out of 1,000? No, my friends. It is 32 Zeus affairs out of 1 angry wife. That is about as good as I can explain it. I don't think Zeus could do better himself. It is not a game that I would normally be inclined to play. It's not my style. However, I did really enjoy it. I would love to play it again. I actually plan to. And gosh darn, is it beautiful. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching. As always, I appreciate it. Sorry this was so rushed. Sorry there's no multiple camera angles. I am literally down to the wire here. But you guys know I like to play this as much as I can before I get to you guys. Plus I've been a little busy with other stuff. But I'm glad I was able to sneak this in time. And so I hope you found it helpful or at least enjoyable. Alright guys, that's it for now. I'll talk to you again later this week.